Okay, peace and blessings, everybody. It's your brother Saray back with yet another one. Peace to the true and living, as always. Peace to the ancestors. Appreciate y'all contributions. And peace to the true and living. Who's the true and living? If y'all been following any of these videos, any of this subject matter, kind of tying all this together, and you kind of maybe seeing, okay, kind of how this kind of correlates, this whole loop of information kind of correlates, then apparently you must be the true and living. Nice to meet you. So, yeah, we're back with another one. Today we're going to deal with something that's, these next couple videos, this is going to be kind of like a, I don't know, a setup for the next couple of videos. So on this video, we're going to talk about addiction. Right, so but we're going to talk about addiction from the perspective of this bioetheric feedback loop. Now, if anybody's not familiar with the bioetheric feedback loop, bioetheric feedback loop is it's based on the concept popularized, well, not even popularized, but suggested initially by Pascal Beverly Randolph, that the soul is electrical. So we're doing kind of like an extended thought experiment in regards to that. We went through the research of Robert O. Becker. We supported the fact that the body is electric. Numerous videos on that. We went into Tesla's framework for physics, which is particleless, more field-based physics. It was influenced by Swami Vivekananda, so it's more in his Vedic metaphysics, so it's more in line with a lot of these spiritual things that we kind of get into. So that with the body being electric, this particleless physics deals a lot with resonance. You see what I'm saying? As opposed to particles going from place to place and everything like that. So, I mean, I know that may not sound like much, but it makes a world of difference. But like I said, we're also dealing with the idea that the soul is electrical, right? So the soul, from an electrical perspective, we're going to be dealing with it as the blueprint for the physical organism and everything like that. We have a previous video where we talked about how psychospiritual trauma can manifest through your energy channels and all that stuff like that, how that translates and everything from one thing to another. Because as we've been getting into this, the bioetheric feedback loop and all that stuff like that, basically the conclusion that we come into is that trauma, you see what I'm saying, there's a feedback loop between the what's perceived as the soul or the blueprint and the physical organism. So guess what? If you read tarot cards, that's a part of the feedback loop. If you freaking whatever form of divination you do, that's a part of the feedback loop. You see what I'm saying? Pyromancy or whatever, where you read the soot left behind by candles and stuff like that. That's still the feedback loop speaking. You see what I'm saying? Rune stones, that's the feedback loop. You know what I'm saying? So things as out there as that, on down to illnesses in your body. We on a previous conversation, we were talking about the work of Dolores Cannon. You know, the AI even coined the term Cannonian causality, where she talks about how you have psychospiritual trauma. You'll be going through something psychospiritually or whatever case may be, and you won't deal with it consciously. It's some sort of issue or circumstance that's happening to you, and you don't deal with it consciously. So it manifests through your body as a sickness. You know what I'm saying? That's a thing. That's Dolores Cannon. She talks about that. We also cross-reference that with another thing that we talk about. It's not just a sickness, it's a feedback loop. So you may have some sort of psycho-spiritual issue going on or whatever, or some sort of trauma going on, and it could manifest through you continuously getting in the same types of relationships. It's some sort of ill treatment that you feel like you deserve, so you keep finding a person to give it to you. You see what I'm saying? Or what Carl Jung calls it, acausal connections and everything like that. Similar to what we talked about with the meaning exercise from the experiential and everything like that, but acausal connections. You have trauma in your based on a situation, and it's not like what Dolores Cannon was talking about. She was talking about in certain occurrences it manifests as illnesses in the body. Jung talks about the same trauma. It could potentially manifest as just acausal, seemingly random situations that feed that particular psychosis. You see what I'm saying? And we're going to talk about that. But we're going to filter all that into the into the whole question of drug addiction, and how does that feedback loop look as far as this is concerned. So basically what this is telling us, as far as a drug addiction is basically the physical outward manifestation of some sort of psycho-spiritual crisis or situation in a person's mind or life. You see what I'm saying? Or some sort of trauma that they've been through or whatever. It's just an outward expression of that. In the experiential material, as well as all of this material or whatever, we talk about that. We talk about how there's videos, the language of situations, because the feedback loop communicates through situations. But like we talked about on previous videos, it doesn't come across like language like how you and I speak. It comes across more archetypally, more theme-like. It's the raw psychological data. By the time it gets to us in our minds or whatever, it has been filtered down to these specific things or whatever case may be. But how it manifests, like in a dream interpretation, based on themes. Astrology is based on themes. This what I'm talking about is based on themes. So we're gonna get into this. The whole conversation about addiction and all that. Okay, so this is the electrodynamics of the shadow, an integrated biopsycho-spiritual analysis of addiction via the bioetheric feedback loop, Jungian synchronicity, and Dolores Cannon's thematic manifestation. Now, don't get me wrong, the experiential has its own flavor of speaking about this type of stuff or whatever case may be. But like I say, I always like to give you receipts. Call this Receiptville, USA, I guess. But I like to give you receipts, and I like to give you people with whole bodies of work so you can check their stuff out, so it's not just something that I'm saying. I can't co-sign on every single thing that they say or whatever, but for the most part they lean in some similar direction of what I'm talking about. So the introduction and conceptual synthesis, the study of addiction conventionally relies on a reductionist model centered primarily on neurochemical pathways. You see what I'm saying? And behavioral modification. So they're dealing with it from a strictly physical perspective, some sort of neurochemical pathways or something like that, chemical imbalances, all kind of terminology like that, and that's the approach to substance abuse, right? So however, an exhaustive understanding necessitates an integrated multi-layer framework that incorporates biophysical fields, like what we've been talking about, like Tesla's framework, acausal psychological processes, like what Carl Jung is talking about, and psychosomatic manifestation principles. That's what Dolores Cannon is talking about, how when you have trauma, it can potentially manifest in your body as an illness. Okay, so let's see here. We're using this information to construct a comprehensive model of addictive pathology that transcends the purely mechanistic view of the human organism. So that's what we kind of been doing this whole time. Kind of transcending this whole concrete, biochemical type thing. We're getting on kind of like on a higher type of level when we talk about it, talking about the feedback loop, talk about acausal connections or whatever. Because see, that's another conversation about free will and determinism. Like I think we spoke about that on a previous video. Let's say everybody talks about free will and everything, right? Let's say if I have 3 people sitting here, is this guy's free will to make $1 million? Is this guy's free will to cure cancer? Is this guy's free will to sit in his basement and play video games all day? Okay, so all 3 of those individuals are exercising their free will, and it seems like from A plus B equals C type perspective or whatever, they may have their own reasons for coming to those conclusions of how they wind up desiring those things that they desire and everything like that. But from an if you were to ask an astrologer who has access, whose information is based off the moment that person took his first breath, before he was influenced by anything physical in his life or whatever case may be, an astrologer would have listed the various acausal factors that will lead this person to want to get rich, that will lead this person to want to cure cancer. You see what I'm saying? That will lead this person to want to sit at home and play video games all day. You see what I'm saying? There are acausal factors in that person's chart that makes them predisposed, or makes their free will, so-called, predisposed to gravitating in a particular direction. You see what I'm saying? So that's just a little tidbit on that. So free will ain't as free as we think it is. So, but we'll get into that on other videos. Free will is kind of tainted, but anyway, let's see. Addiction is analyzed here not merely as a compulsion or chemical dependency, right? It's not merely listed as a compulsion or a chemical dependency, but as a systematic pathology rooted in an energetic deficit, right? So it's energetically something missing. You see what I'm saying? And it's a systematic pathology, more like a pattern. You see what I'm saying? It's more like a pattern generated by some sort of imbalance, or like how we talked about symbols, patterns, and principles. Some principle in the person's life is unbalanced, so it creates some sort of unfavorable pattern in their life. This is exactly that. However, we're going to filter it through this terminology, right? So we can kind of get, like how we always say, get a little bit more, get a few more receipts as we go through this. So an unaddressed psychological or spiritual void, right? Unaddressed psychological or spiritual void, often identified as the shadow or the existential wound. I think Jung coined the term the shadow, generates a measurable bioelectrical disequilibrium within the organism. All right, so some psychological trauma or whatever. Remember we said psychological trauma creates a measurable electrical signal in the body, right? And it's filtered through this DC electrical system, not just the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, but it's filtered through this DC system, this DC nervous system that Becker found and everything like that, distributed through your fascial networks, your fascia and everything like that, and it's ingrained inside of your body on down to the DNA level. We've talked about that on a previous video. So this disequilibrium subsequently modulates the individual's subtle energy field, generating acausal attractors, right? Acausal attractors, right? Your relationship, remember how we in the experiential, it's fleshed out a little bit differently because we're dealing with your relationships to particular themes in your life, or whatever case may be. Having balanced or unbalanced relationships with particular themes in your life kind of yields certain patterns, or whatever case may be. Let's see here. This disequilibrium subsequently modulates the individual's subtle energy field, generating acausal attractors, synchronicity in the environment, because the environment, the field, which is the environment, is reflective in nature. It resonates things, so it's going to match your field. If that's something you're thinking about, feeling, or whatever case may be, the external field of your environment is going to resonate with that same frequency, and you're going to draw situations acausally into your environment just based off of that being something that you're fixated on energetically. Okay, so these attractors compel the individual toward behaviors, substance use, or gambling that thematically represents the unmet need. Something is unbalanced principle-wise, some need that you're not getting, something that you want that you can't get. So it's a psychological thing. Psychologically, something you want that you can't get, like Maslow's hierarchy of needs would suggest: food, clothing, shelter, and all this stuff like that, and all these psychological needs. Whatever psychological needs you feel like you can't get, or whatever case may be, the outward manifestation of that need, or whatever, or in some sort of physical substitute for whatever that need may be, would be the drug, the habit, the gambling, or whatever case may be, that particular pattern, or what have you. So Okay, so this represents an unmet need, thereby establishing and reinforcing a self-perpetuating bioetheric feedback loop, right? There's a feedback loop between you and people call it the higher self and all that. In this conversation, we're just calling the blueprint or the soul or whatever the case may be, just to kind of make it simple. You style it how you want to style it. One sec. Okay, so the underlying thesis posited is that addiction represents a deeply distorted form of spiritual and biological learning. A deeply distorted form of spiritual and biological learning, perpetually reflecting the internal imbalance back into the external destructive reality. Right? So let's read that again. The underlying thesis posited is that addiction represents a deeply distorted spiritual and biological learning. So basically, it's the feedback loop trying to teach you something. You see what I'm saying? Perpetually reflecting the internal imbalance back into external destructive reality. Remember we said God don't never shut up. God don't never stop talking. You see what I'm saying? And God has infinite patience for my and your lack of understanding. So this is kind of one of those situations. But this isn't, in the way this is laid out, the addiction and everything like that, it's not a neat, clean little lesson like that. It's a person may be addicted to whatever they're addicted to for years, a lifetime. You see what I'm saying? Almost. So, and that addiction is, again, a manifestation of some sort of psycho-spiritual potential crisis, trauma, something that they went through, whatever the case may be, and it just manifests as a physical addiction. Now that may be something more noticeable, like it may have been something like, oh, such and such started drinking after he got divorced or something like that. It may be something as noticeable as that, and it may be something a little bit less noticeable, and it may be a less noticeable habit, or however it may go. You see what I'm saying? Let's say defining the integrated axioms. To facilitate this interdisciplinary analysis, 3 core axioms derived from these distinct fields must be established as foundational principles. Axiom 1. Bioelectric consciousness. The human being is fundamentally a bioelectric entity characterized by an information system distinct from high frequency neurological signals traditionally studied. So basically, in this whole paradigm that we're dealing with, you're not just ruled by the electrical signals that are produced by your brain. Your brain doesn't rule you. The brain is just a radio. It just receives impressions from the field. You see what I'm saying? Okay, so and we talked about that on previous videos. Go back to the video, the architectonics of psychospiritual causality or whatever, and we talk about that it's no coincidence that they called the ether in the Vedic cosmology is called Akasha, and it's associated with the Akashic records. Okay, so no coincidence that I told you that everything that we talking about scientifically on paper, it has an experiential counterpart. So the collective unconscious of humanity, that's a portion of the information that's stored in this ether, or in this Akasha. That's a portion of the Akashic records, so-called. So that's what they're talking about as well. So moving right along. Okay, so within the framework, the soul or self is hypothesized to be the informational content or regulatory template stored and maintained within this electric field, right? Hold on one second, make sure I ain't missing anything. Okay, let me go back. High frequency neurological signals traditionally studied. Okay, so we're saying that the brain, everything that we got going on, it's not limited by the brain's activity or whatever. We're not subject to the brain. The brain is just a radio for the field. Okay, so Robert O. Becker is pioneering work steps that living organisms maintain measurable DC electric charge on their body's surface. The DC current is integral to regenerative processes and challenges the established mechanistic understanding of the body. Within this framework, the soul or self is hypothesized to be the informational content or the blueprint or regulatory template stored and maintained within this electrical field. This foundational premise shifts the pathology of addiction from purely chemical to energetic and informational. Right, so it's basically talking about the bioelectric nature of consciousness. I think on a previous video we were running with the metaphor of the soul being on, or the blueprint being stored on some etheric server on another phase of the energy outside of the physical. You see what I'm saying? And you can destroy your phone 1,000,000 times, and as long as you got it backed up on the server, you can always bounce back. You see what I'm saying? The destruction of the phone doesn't destroy the information if it's stored on the server. Similar thing with how we dealing with the soul, and there's a feedback loop from that to the physical individual, and it does it, and he don't the soul, God, whatever you want to call it, don't speak in human language. He's speaking the language of situations, stuff like that. You see what I'm saying? The sicknesses, situations, people, patterns of types of people, and stuff like that. See, that's a whole nother. Okay, you might meet 10 different people, or whatever case may be, and those 10 different people might be the same archetype. Or they, you see what I'm saying? Being able to recognize the archetype of what person that you kind of dealing with, or the type of patterns of people that kind of come in and out of your life, however it may go. So axiom number 2, acausal manifestation, right? Okay, so the relationship between internal psychological events and external reality is not solely governed by linear causality. Carl Jung's concept of synchronicity defines an acausal connecting principle where psychological events are linked to external world events by meaningful coincidence. Right? Let's read that again, because once you get to a certain place, there is no such thing as coincidence, right? The relationship between internal psychological events and external reality is not solely governed by linear causality. A plus B equals C. Carl Jung's concept, I think that's what we've been saying for the past few years at this point. Okay, so Carl Jung's concept of synchronicity defines an acausal connecting principle, right? Where psychological events are linked to external world events by meaningful coincidences, even lacking a discoverable causal connection. Go back to the video where we were talking about the meaning exercise, where you take several events that are not seemingly related, but they have the same theme. You might have experienced a certain feeling or a certain circumstance in the various different situations with different people, different locations, different particulars in the situation. The only thing that's the same is the theme. And as we find out, as we deal with the theme, or discern whether the theme is balanced or unbalanced in that interaction, and that determines whether you have a favorable experience or not. If you identify that theme going into future interactions or whatever, regardless of the situation or what have you, if you can identify that theme and balance and make sure that theme stays balanced in those various interactions or whatever, you will have favorable outcomes. You will continuously have favorable outcomes or whatever case may be. So that's an example of that thematic understanding, those acausal circumstances or whatever case may be. The stuff that's underneath that our logical minds kind of ignore or whatever case may be. It's in the same line as those waking dream interpretations, all that stuff like that. It's in the same line. It's that background stuff that we typically don't pay attention to. All right, but just moving right along. So Jung and physicist Wolfgang Pauli proposed that acausal connections provide an understanding of the psyche and the world parallel to that offered by causal connections. So 1 + 1 is 2. That's a causal connection. That's clearly linked or whatever case may be. But the theme of reciprocity might be a principle or whatever case may be. And every time that theme is unbalanced or whatever case may be, I get an unfavorable result in relationships. Something like that. That's acausal, because it operates independent of who's in the situation, how many people in the situation, if they male, female, dog, cat, whatever they are, child, adult, or whatever case may be. the principle of reciprocity can apply in any of those situations. That's an acausal. That's an example of what he's talking about when he's talking about acausal things or what have you. But moving right along, the principle explains the seemingly fated nature of addicted circumstances, where opportunities for relapse or initiation appear coincidentally linked to the individual's inner state. Right? Okay, so I think we liken this into previous videos where, let's say hypothetically, you're trying to make a change or something like that. I ain't going to the club no more. I ain't going out. I ain't hanging on the block no more. Whatever it is that you do, and you trying to make a change in your situation or whatever. What it's saying is that on an acausal level, because you're trying to make that change, it's a video we got called the survival mechanism of patterns. More than likely I'll link it in the comments or whatever case may be, and it talks about that. Oh, I'm not going to do this no more. Okay, patterns want to eat. The more they surface and you execute whatever, they eat. So it's going to come up. The opportunity for you to hit the block again, the opportunity for you to do whatever it is that you was doing that you're trying to stop, it's going to come up again. You see what I'm saying? So that's the acausal aspect, because there is no 1 + 1 = 2 in that, or whatever case may be. If you move to another city and you all of a sudden, you know what I'm saying, at the gas station, somebody walk up on, hey man, I got that XYZ 1 2 3. You know, that's acausal. You see what I'm saying? Yeah, that just so happened to be your thing. You see what I'm saying? That's acausal. You see what I'm saying? So let's see here. Consequently, hold on 1 second. Okay, axiom 3, thematic pathology, right? Physical, mental, and behavioral disorders, including addiction, originate from unaddressed psychological trauma or spiritual deficiencies, right? So physical, mental, and behavioral disorders, including addiction, including but not limited to addiction, originate from unaddressed psychological trauma or spiritual deficiency. So then we say this unaddressed psychological stuff is going to either come out in your body as far as sicknesses and disorders and things or whatever, or it's going to create situations or generate relationships with people in your life for whatever case may be, right? So physical, mental, and behavioral disorders, including addiction, originate from unaddressed psychological trauma or spiritual deficiencies. Dolores Cannon's quantum healing hypnosis therapy is based on the principle that the subconscious mind is a vast reservoir of knowledge, wisdom, and the key to activating the body's innate self-healing capabilities. Because again, this stuff mirrors, the internal mirrors the external. Remember we just said that the collective unconscious is an aspect of the ether. It is the information contained in the ether. The ether is the akasha, and it's associated with the so-called akashic records. You see what I'm saying? Okay, so consequently, pathology is viewed as a direct, peep this, pathology, you getting sick, is viewed as a direct symbolic manifestation, Go back to the video where we talked about psychospiritual causality, and we talked about how it manifests in your meridians and how different organs and everything like that correspond with different emotions and different situations in your life and stuff like that. All that stuff like that in traditional Chinese medicine and Ayurvedic medicine, all that stuff like that. Somebody else already thought of this. So they didn't associate those things, make those correspondences for nothing. So consequently, pathology is viewed as direct symbolic manifestation or physical representation of what the subconscious mind believes is needed to address a core psychological lack. You see what I'm saying? So the average person, go back to the video where we talk about semantic entropy. You see what I'm saying? Semantic entropy and symbol illiteracy. You see what I'm saying? Semantic entropy is the slow breaking down of meaning or losing of meaning of words over time, or whatever case may be. Symbol illiteracy is what we're talking about here, because the mind and the subconscious mind does not communicate in English or any of our human languages. That's why in True Master, for the last 6 years, I've been talking about the language of situations. You see what I'm saying? So that corresponds with kind of that, because that's kind of how it communicates. It communicates in sicknesses and in all kind of symbolic ways. You're dealing with an aspect of the mind that communicates in a more abstract, thematic, symbol heavy type of way, or what have you. So that's kind of what we're dealing with. So moving right along, the bioetheric, and back in the day, like I said, when I first started making these videos, and I was kind of still experimenting around with the language and everything like that, one of the terms was stacking awareness. Stacking awareness was the slang term for the mind operating on various different levels simultaneously, and it having various different languages for those different levels. So that was that conversation. So the bioetheric foundation. Okay, let's see. Becker, Tesla, and the etheric self. Okay, so let's see here. It's talking about Becker's discovery of the DC current system. We've talked about this on previous videos. I won't bog this one down with that. But basically what it was, he was a scientist that basically discovered how to regenerate human tissue and everything like that, grow back limbs and everything like that. And in the process, he discovered a whole different nervous system, a third nervous system that operates off DC current, that basically governs cellular healing and regrowth and everything like that. Okay, so let's see here. Okay, so the bioetheric feedback loop and the reflection principle. The core concept of the bioetheric feedback loop posits that the integral energetic and informational states are dynamically linked to external reality. So let's say that again. The core concept of the bioetheric feedback loop posits that the internal energetics and informational states, your trauma, how you feel inside, what you think about, okay, are dynamically linked to external reality. If the self is an electric informational field, right? We go back to the video where I talk about melanin in the human biofield. We did a whole long video on that. The electric soul, then the concept of karma is interpreted as the unresolved informational content stored within the DC system. So in this model, karma is a feedback loop. That nature has a tendency to heal itself and to self-correct and to self-assemble. So karma is just a feedback loop. Most of the stuff that they talk about that we're getting into in this, it's nature trying to heal itself. But when we talk about nature, sometimes we talk about nature as if it's a tree or a mountain or something out there. But realistically, we're a part of nature. So we're in it, experiencing it simultaneously at the same time. Okay, the reflection principle is the mechanism by which this stored internal disequilibrium is projected back into the environment and reflected in the physiological state. The presence of this feedback loop is stated to lead to learning, right? Okay, so the drug thing is a twisted aspect of the feedback loop because it's generating that situation, generating that addiction, but it's a form of the blueprint trying to heal itself and trying to teach you something. But sometimes a person may be so enthralled in the drug or whatever they're addicted to the point where, as you can see, the average person is symbol illiterate. So it's hard enough to get it if your car breaks down or something like that, or you have something random happens to you in the course of a day. That's the mind trying to communicate with you, or that's the soul, however, the blueprint trying to communicate something to you. That's a part of the feedback loop. But most of us are so symbol illiterate that we'll never catch it, much less an addiction. You see what I'm saying? So that's just something to think about when we talk about all these symbolic and abstract levels of communication that the blueprint feeds us in our everyday experience. Okay, so instead of leading to the presence of this feedback loop is stated to lead to learning. In the context of addiction, however, this learning process is profoundly distorted. Instead of leading to the necessary spiritual growth or resolution of the underlying informational wound, the compulsion forces the system to repeatedly engage in the destructive acts. So based off your unbalanced relationship with whatever you got going on up here, or whatever case may be, it generates a unfavorable vicious cycle or pattern, like how we've been talking about. Okay, this cyclical engagement acts as a mirror. It's a mirror, perpetually reflecting and reinforcing the energetic disequilibrium originating from the inner void, thereby compromising the system's capacity for genuine healing and regeneration. So whatever you got going on, whatever the addiction is, some sort of way symbolically, it's going to mirror what's going on in the person's life. Okay, so let's see here. Talks about Tesla, talks about Curlian photography. Hold on one second here. The requirement of Africa's fields. Okay. Okay, the pull of the void. The pull of the void. Jungian synchronicity and addiction. Okay. All right, so the pull of the void, Jungian synchronicity and addiction, defining synchronicity as an acausal attractor. Jung defines synchronicity as the acausal connection. Synchronicity is seemingly conveniently related coincidences. Basically, how would be a normal way of putting it. But you know, as we examine some of this stuff, there's no such thing as coincidence. All this stuff is some level of synchronicity. So Jung defines synchronicity as the acausal connection between internal psychological events and external world events through meaningful coincidences. All right, let's say that again. As the acausal connection between internal psychological events and external world events through meaningful coincidences. Critically, Jungian theory distinguishes synchronicity from magical thinking. While both deal with seemingly unrelated events, synchronicity suggests an unknown, non-causal connection, whereas magical thinking attributes a paranormal, causal connection. Right? So let's go back. Let's see here. Critically, Jungian theory distinguishes synchronicity from magical thinking. While both deal with seemingly unrelated events, synchronicity suggests an unknown, non-causal connection, right? Whereas magical thinking attributes a paranormal causal connection. You still, even if you're performing magical workings, it's still A plus B equals C. You see what I'm saying? Even if it's magic, you know you did something magically to cause that. You knowingly initiated the cause with some sort of action, and if you get the result that you need, that's still A plus B equals C, and that's not this acausal stuff that we're talking about. There's a difference. Okay, so the principle. Okay, let's see. Critically, okay, while both deal with seemingly unrelated events, synchronicity suggests an unknown non-causal connection. This principle is essential for understanding how the addict's inner state can consistently manifest opportunities for their compulsive behavior. So addicts will continuously find opportunities to be addicts because of the simple fact, because of the innate imbalance with whatever psychological thing that they got going on. Basically, their self is generating their access to whatever they're trying to get access to. You see what I'm saying? Their self is generating the opportunity to go, you know, do what they trying to do. I'm trying to keep it clean on the on the tape. Okay, so the existential wound and the compensatory drive. Jung viewed addiction not as a moral weakness, but as a complex manifestation of a human psyche out of balance. Now, this is what Jung said. Now, we've been talking about principles being out of balance, right? Jung says that the human psyche is out of balance when you have an addiction. So addictive behaviors are recognized as attempts to fill a deep existential void. So it's something missing, some void is missing. So this person engages in some sort of repetitive, destructive type of behavior. Okay, an invisible pain that escapes conscious awareness. This psychological deficiency or existential wound constitutes the internal unconscious driver of the processes. So this wound, this unbalanced principle, as we called it in self to self, but this wound that the person has, or whatever case may be. This is the generator of this pattern that they have, or whatever case may be. You can take all the stimulation away from them, or what have you, all the physical stimulation away from that person, but if they still have this wound, they're going that pattern will resurface, or what have you. So this psychological deficiency or existential wound constitutes the internal unconscious driver of the process. The unconscious drive utilizes the synchronistic principle to draw an external events. The unconscious drive utilizes the synchronistic principle to draw in external events. The availability of the drug, the chance encounter with a gambling venue, or the unexpected financial windfall that offers a temporary, albeit profoundly distorted, compensation for the missing spiritual or emotional meaning. So that itch, in self to self, and the experiential, that's the survival mechanism of patterns. But as you can see, that itch, acausally, that itch will always make itself available to be scratched. You see what I'm saying? Okay, the blueprint, the deficiency that you have in the blueprint will always give that to you as some manner of feedback. It's going to reflect your deficiency in the mind, or your deficiency in your spiritual makeup, or whatever creates this situation for you. So Jung's perspective on the path to recovery for a severe alcoholic was that nothing less than the experience of a genuine conversion could be effective. This suggests that the depths of the existential need demands a transformation equivalent to a spiritual awakening. So he's not telling him to go to rehab and it's some psychological thing, or just some regular thing or whatever. He's saying you need a whole spiritual awakening or whatever. So this right here, these additional layers that are not considered in traditional therapy or whatever, this unlocks maybe other layers or whatever that can be addressed maybe in future methods or whatever. We're just having a conversation, acausal stuff or whatever. As we can see, we bring in the receipts. With Carl Jung talks about this. Dolores Cannon, some of her stuff goes into things similar to this or what have you, but this is something that could potentially be considered, or potentially benefit people, like if it is considered. Okay, so this should suggest that the depths of the existential need demands a transformation equivalent to a spiritual awakening, which the addictive behavior temporarily mimics via chemical or behavioral means. So whatever spiritual awakening that you're craving, that you actually need, that's causing you to have this addiction or this disorder or whatever case may be, when you get your fix, that's the mirror substitute of the thing that you actually need. That's the mirror inappropriate substitute for what you really need to be doing. You see what I'm saying? If that makes any sense. Okay, so filtering addiction through acausality, drugs versus gambling. The acausal connection manifests distinct phenomenologies depending on the type of addiction, aligning with the specific compensatory drive of the individual. Drug addiction, the synchronicity of escape. In drug addiction, the unconscious drive is often focused on the need for immediate, profound relief, escape from emotional pain, or internal numbness. This psychological state creates a field of attraction for circumstances that provide chemical exit, right? Such as the synchronous, unplanned meeting with a supplier, the sudden availability of funds for use, or finding oneself in an environment where substance abuse is easily facilitated. So this is all the feedback loop. This is the survival mechanism of patterns, what we were talking about, but this is all the feedback loop. Okay, for an environment where substance abuse is easily facilitated, the external environment seems to conspire to enable the desired chemical alteration. All right, gambling addiction, the synchronicity of control, gambling disorder, defined as a behavioral addiction, right, as opposed to a substance addiction. You see what I'm saying? But but again, thematically, we're still dealing with some manner of addiction from a thematic perspective. Okay, so it's highly reliant upon the interpretation of meaningful coincidences. Okay, gambling disorder, defined as a behavioral addiction, is highly reliant. It's a pattern. It's a behavioral pattern. Highly reliant upon the interpretation of meaningful coincidences. The fundamental psychological driver is often the compensation for inner chaos or perceived powerlessness achieved through the illusion of mastery or over chance and destiny. So it's basically it's a person. It may be a person. It may very well, because it's different thematic things depending on what's going on in the individual person. It may be a person who is perceived of to be powerless in their own mind or what have you. They're perceived as powerless and what have you. However, winning, you see what I'm saying, in their mind, that's the reflection. That's the out of balance reflection of their reality or whatever case may be, winning or whatever case may be, or this gambling habit. And when they win, that's the reflection of what they should be doing in a balanced sense to actually balance out whatever they're going through or whatever case may be. They may have, it may be something totally different that they need to do. They may need to go home and save money. You know what I'm saying? That may be their thing or whatever case may be. But gambling to get them out of their situation or whatever. But the imbalanced reflection of that would be a gambling habit or something like that. So they're highly reliant on the interpretation of meaningful coincidence. The fundamental psychological driver is often compensation for inner chaos or perceived powerlessness achieved through the illusion of mastery over chance and destiny. The gambling addict interprets random data, a lucky number that appears in a dream, a sequence of wins, or a near miss, a powerful acausal sign validating their compulsion and their inherent destiny for success. This interpretation provides a profound, albeit false, sense of control needed to counter internal disorganization. So it's something that they're missing on the inside that makes them do this. If the individual fails to grasp the compensatory meaning of these synchronous experiences, if they're not literate enough from a symbolic perspective to understand the language of situations or the feedback loop that the blueprint is giving them to tell them that something is missing, but the feedback is a gambling habit or whatever. If they're not symbol literate enough to understand that, or they're not around somebody who can tell them that or whatever, they might have this habit for years. They might die with that habit. You see what I'm saying? So they're just moving toward excessive superstitions, reinforcing the belief that external signs dictate their fate. In extreme chronic cases, the overabundance of perceived meaningful coincidence can parallel features of schizophrenic delusion, electrical dysregulation, the bioetheric state of addiction. The internal pathology that drives the acausal manifestation is physically measurable through the lens of electromagnetism and subtle energy analysis, right? Clinical EEG correlates in substance dependency. Standard EEG, electroencephalography studies reveal certain specific patterns of electrical dysregulation and substance dependency. Analysis of EEG power in alcoholism, for example, frequently shows a pronounced dominance of low frequency delta and theta. This neurological pattern is generally characteristic of non-adult stages of phlegonic development or profound unconscious states. The prevalence of slow wave activity in the chronic addiction implies a measurable state of neurological regression or severe functional impairment. So it does manifest in the brain, but realistically, like we said, the brain is just reading the field. So it's just that's just the imprint of what's happening in the field. The finding correlates directly with established research demonstrating dysfunctional activity in the prefrontal cortex, which impairs the ability to make rational decisions, balancing immediate reward against long-term consequences. The energetic regression compromises the higher order executive functions essential for conscious regulation, compelling the individual toward the immediate temporary fulfillment of the thematic need. So it's more about that particular, the theme at play in their life, more so than it is the drug, anything else, or whatever case may be. It's a disequilibrium with some aspect of their life, and it's creating this particular pattern of them going out doing whatever. Okay, so bioetheric field pathology. Let's see here.